Hello everyone, welcome to Hope Ninja Parents episode 3. We are here talking all things about kids and screen times. So we're going to be able to help with what are great screens, when to use them, what to use them for, and how to make it even better for you and your family. So let's get started. So everyone, welcome to Hope Ninja Parents. You're with me, Cynthia Painter, mindset coach, and Dr. Louise Metcalf. You want to introduce yourself there?
Sure. I'm a psychologist of almost 30 years. I'm a mum, and I'm the founder of Gheorg, the little robot who helps kids with anxiety.
Yes, we love Gheorg. And if you want to know more about Gheorg, the app, which is the Gheorg kid-friendly robot, the details will be in the description, and we'll talk a little bit more about Gheorg later. But for right now, we're going to jump into screens. Oh my God, is this like one of the top 5 issues? I'm doing 10 fingers if you're watching me. Top 5 issues that parents struggle with their kids, right? When we won't give away our ages, but when I was growing up, there was a concern about sticking kids in front of TVs as the babysitter. Well, now we have mobile because we've got screens. So it's a really interesting topic, I think. This is a really juicy one we can jump into, don't you think, Louise?
Absolutely. This one has been hot for a strong number of generations now, but it's more complex now because we just have too many. We have a lot of screens now.
Yeah, we do, don't we? Okay, well, we'll define screens in a second. And I think it's worth noting that there has been an increase in screen time usage. We're currently recording this at the end of 2021. Not only Australia and Sydney, but around the world, they've had various lockdowns due to the COVID pandemic. And as much as we've all learned how to make our own bread, paint a masterpiece, and become a yogi, there's certainly been more screen time for lots of reasons. So we'll jump into it. Let's start by defining what we mean by screens. I know, Louise, you wanted to make sure we talk about what screens are we talking about, what people are doing at them, and how we feel about them. So let's start with types of screens. Let's actually list those out. Let's see. Phone. I almost knocked my water over. Laptops, TVs, iPads. Yep. Yeah. So all those sort of things. And so that's all stuff that we actually even take for granted. Now, funnily enough, if we were to do this in like another year's time, we'd also be talking about fridges. They would have screens on them. All of our home appliances are becoming more and more screen centered, right? To be more human AI. So we are, as right now, we're just talking about our portable screens and the screens that we have in our household. All right. I would love you to take this one from here, Louise. Tell us your thoughts on screens, and let's pull this one apart.
Okay, so when I talk about screens, I like to break it down into 3 things. The first thing is the actual device itself, because it does make a difference. The second thing is what you're doing on the screen, so what you're using it for, what your kid is using it for. And the third thing is like, what are they/we exposed to on that? So 3 different things, and really useful to think through each of those 3 things separately.
Yes. So let's start with types of devices. Now, funnily enough, when Louise and I first met, it was when I was working for an optometry company called Luxottica at the time. So this takes me back, right? Because although I wasn't an optometrist, I did a lot of work to support the education of optometrists. And I remember them talking about how close you have your screens. Back then, we didn't really have mobile phones, really. God, I sound like a dinosaur. But we talked about screens. You said there's a difference in the screens, right? And difference in the devices. And there definitely is a difference between arm's length devices and greater than arm's length. I mean, I know we all grew up with our parents telling us that we'd, get 4 eyes for watching too much TV, right? So that's one way of differentiating them. Did you have another way you wanted to look at the differences in the devices?
Yeah, for a psychologist, it's more about the activity with the device. So, for example, with TVs, you do interact with your TV these days, but not as much as your mobile phone, for example, or your tablet. And really, the mobile phone is the most intensive thing that we interact with on a daily basis. And if you work on computers, your computer tends to be your second one. And then it's tablets. But the very last one on the list tends to be the TV. So these days we talk about TVs as being actually the much more friendly version of a screen, because it's kind of limited. You can't pick it up and take it with you. Even the very light ones, no one's doing that, which is great. Please don't do that. Don't start doing that. And they tend to have limited functionality. So although you might be watching Netflix a fair bit. A lot of people binge Netflix on lockdown, and that's fine. It's not the same thing as, say, interacting consistently with your phone, doing something around social media, for example. So the TV is seen as the more friendly version, the version that allows you to kind of be a bit more present than, say, a mobile phone right up the other end.
Yeah. Now, interestingly on that, I was looking into, now, first of all, interaction with the TV. My kids always tell me to stop yelling at the TV. So I do interact with my TV quite a lot. Will anyone else do that, or is it just me? But I actually saw that there is some changes in how houses and units and apartment blocks and so forth are being designed, because a lot of the next generation, those are in their 20s and those coming through. And in fact, the latest generations, and I'm going to I think it's Generation Alpha, is actually the first generation that's grown up with the device in its hand from almost birth. But they actually won't be buying such big TVs, right? Because they're so used to using large monitors or use it in conjunction with their other devices. And my kids are teens and tweens. They watch TV. They watch YouTube like we watch TV. So they use the screen, they use the TV screen, but they're watching their favorite YouTubers. Like, they don't think of watching the block or news or whatever. Everything is YouTube as far. So it's quite interesting. Then even the TV device itself is going to go through a transformation.
Yeah, for sure.
Interesting one. All right. So let's now, just for the sake of all the listeners, we're not going to go too much into social media here. We're going to do a separate one on social media. Right, so we will touch on it, but we will go deep into social media on our next episode, so watch out for that one. All right, so let's talk about uses, right? And you're right, the smaller device, the phone and so forth, is more on us. I know certainly we are attached to it. I find I'm carrying it around. I have to stop the kids from taking it into the toilet while they're like, have a break from it, for God's sake, right? Or, into their bedrooms at night and all those sorts of things. So let's talk about uses of device, because that's become very interesting, particularly as we went into lockdown and now as we come out of lockdown.
Yeah, so over lockdown, not surprisingly, screen use went up. The average was about 6 to 8 hours a day, they say. We definitely had days in our household that were not that good. That would have been a good day. Yeah, I think we're all guilty of that, right? So I'm really hesitant to talk about screen limits. I don't tend to talk very much about screen limits, but just for the record, right? And not to make any mum feel guilty. So please don't. It's just good food for thought. So under 2s should be 0 time on screens. 2 to 5 should be 1 hour. And 5 to 17, which is a huge age range. And not really, this should be looked at, I think. But it's 2 hours, right? Now, just I know. If you just kind of just schooling online, you're nixing those guidelines, right? You're way above those
Blowing
guidelines.
them out the water.
Yeah, so most kids were way over those guidelines during the pandemic. And look, I think it's very hard to keep a kid, particularly in tween and teen years, into the 2 hour limit. So you're doing well if you manage that, I think. You're some kind of like superhero / wizard parent if you're achieving that on a
Yeah.
daily. Yeah, so what they're using them for, right, is part of that screen time thing. Because most kids when they're younger are using, apps and, maybe a site that their parent has kind of taken them to. So it's parent approved, usually it's educational, and if you're sort of a 5 or 6 kid and you're using it for entertainment purposes, you pretty much never go past YouTube Kids for most kids, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, even those apps can have interesting problems attached to them in relation to time. So I'm going to talk about YouTube Kids because it's the most common. But YouTube Kids has, just like YouTube, has an algorithm that basically tries to spot what the kid is very interested in and shows them more of that.
Yes.
And that can sound lovely, right? So that's easy.
So helpful. So helpful.
We're searching for them, right? So that's great. The downside, though, is how the brain reacts to that. So the brain actually reacts to that in a way which is really interesting. It sees it as like a constant task. So it's like, oh, I haven't watched that one. I better watch that. And then a next one pops up. Oh, I haven't seen that. Must watch that. And so it just kind of feels like after a while, though you kind of like the show that you're watching, it feels like kind of mental overload because it's a never-ending task.
Yeah.
It's designed that way. It's designed to keep you on there. Now that is a very important thing to know about YouTube and YouTube Kids, because we have to, even at that very young age of say 5, we have to start educating kids on what the technology is really doing. So even on a very mild app, right? YouTube Kids has all sorts of like filters, and they're very particular about the programs they allow on there, and they're very fussy about creators on YouTube Kids, and you can't advertise to kids. I only learned that very recently, but that was cool. So there's all sorts of different things in there to protect them. Even that has problems. So yeah, it just gets kind of worse after that.
Yeah, look, and I think the brain as well, because it does rotate, right? And I think this is the same with games and so forth. And YouTube is it goes on to the next one. So it's like I even have the thing of I'll just watch this and then I'll go do the thing. And it becomes this continuous little treadmill that you're on, because it's like, just this one, and time flies. It's like a casino, right? They just never want you to leave, and you just don't notice the time that's going by. And particularly when you're sucked in visually, it's designed with the right colors and the right audio and the right stimulus and particularly with the AI, the algorithm feeding it back to you. And I'm big on social media. I'm really, it's a great concept and these different platforms, but they are designed to keep you engaged.
Yeah. I did a course a few years ago, and they called it the eyes economy. I think that's a great way to see it. They're literally stealing your eyesight, right? That's the economy. So yeah, those moments, when you're staring at a screen and you're having a conversation with someone, like, that's you're fully engaged in the eyes economy. You're paying your dues for that free, service or site that you're looking at. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm wondering, I think everyone else is wondering as well. So what is the impact psychologically? What is the impact on the mind of, and you've given us some, and I know we talked about it just for the framework of time, but, we've got up to 5 and then 5 to 17. Big jump here. What's the impact of, screen time on the development of the mind and how we view the world.
Yeah, so there's some really interesting thinking problems that kind of happen, called those cognitive problems, and some really interesting affective or emotional problems that kind of surface as well. But the one I think will really shock people is that the more you use sites as a young child that are kind of like YouTube Kids or things that kind of lead you along, which most apps do, even the most well-meaning educational apps often just lead kids along for long periods of time. They have this interesting effect in the brain that has only just been reported, so we'll keep following it. But it's basically a thinning of the cortex.
Right.
Like this part of the brain, that higher level part of the brain. So
Right.
that is such an interesting problem. It's a little bit scary because if you don't have as much cortex, you struggle to do things like critical thinking. And, you know, this podcast is about hope. And critical thinking, you know, although it's contrary to a lot of people's view of hope, is actually a core part of hope. Really, really important hope component. Because if you don't have critical thinking alongside hope, what happens is you tend to have naivety. And so you fall over at some point, right? Because you're not critically thinking through things. And then you think, hope's no good. Hope's good for nothing. So critical thinking actually gives you that kind of hope which will last throughout your lifetime. So we need that cortex, we need that capacity to critically think. And the more that you are led through technology, according to this piece of great neuro research, the less you're building that. So that's quite an interesting, very big problem.
Yeah, would that also have an impact? Because I want to say I think it is, but then you might correct me. So would that also have an impact on their emotional calibration? If that cortex is thinning, the critical thinking is there, and you're trying to say, well, logically, this thing is going to happen. I talk to my kids all the time, and they go down the worry line rather than the hope line, and so I'm wondering whether that will actually make them more, I don't want to say emotionally imbalanced, but impact the ability to have that emotional regulation, because if they're critical thinking, they can't step back objectively and have a look at it.
Yeah, once we start, you know, delving more into like apps like social media, this really starts to bump up, because what's happening when, you know, kids are interacting with a piece of technology like social media, there are things that are sort of popping up, you know, kind of the likes, also the things that they think you should be interested in, and in some you know apps of social media, it also shows you things that it thinks you will be angry about.
Yeah.
So yeah, to get that interaction, right, to keep the eye economy going. So yeah, one of the big things that happens for the brain when it's constantly having to when it feels compelled to check, basically compelled to check, because the app is going, check this, read this is important. What happens is, you're starting to actually almost train the brain for anxiety.
This is interesting because, and we will talk social media in much more depth, but if we take YouTube as an example, and it is a sort of social media, but let's take YouTube and games. So I can talk for my kids who, like I said, tweens and teens, they get that anxiety of having to check in with their YouTuber. Right. So the YouTuber says, oh, there's a new, you know, such and such has got a new thing out. And of course, the YouTubers are predominantly watching are ones that are playing games that they then want to watch, you know, Roblox and all sorts, you know, Minecraft and so forth. But there is that FOMO, that needing to check in on, and my youngest is like 10, right? So needing to check in on that YouTuber, and he's got something out, or he's going to be putting something out, or so forth. So you see this coming across into those examples. And how would you say it also plays out for those kids that are really into their gaming? Like my youngest particularly is into his gaming. You know, he wants to be on the device regardless of what he's doing, but games, any forms of games are his jam.
Yeah, well, don't mistake games. Most games, I'm sure there are some out there that aren't like this, but most games are designed to be addictive.
Yeah.
So, they're very hard to keep kids off, right? You might sort of have a reaction that, oh, well, kids just shouldn't be using them. And that sounds all well and good, but it's very, very hard to keep kids off games because they talk about them at school.
Gamified. That's the whole point, right? You go, and we actually talk in the corporate world and in organizations about bringing gamification into what we do for performance reviews and for launches and so forth, right? So there is that gamification is there to keep you intrigued. You build your skills. There's actually even a TED talk, I can't remember his name now, he talks about the Super Mario effect to life, right? And about, it's great, TED talk, love it, right? And about the fact that, to apply, now this is an interesting twist on it though, and I do wish I could remember, if we find the name, we'll put it into the show notes for this as well. But his TED talk was using Super Mario Brothers as an idea of when you go and learn a game, you don't fail and then go, I'm terrible, I'm never playing that game again. Whereas in life, we may do, I can't do that, so I'm not going to give it a go. What we do in a game is that we sit there and go, couldn't get past that obstacle. Now I know what to do with that. I go back and I regenerate or whatever the game is particularly doing, and I give it another go, right? And I keep giving it a go with the idea of getting that reward or getting to that next level and next level and next level, right?
Yeah.
So
everything about games is bad. Gamification for the corporate world, gamification in real life can be quite positive. Done well, obviously, it can also be done quite badly, but done well, it can be really positive. The problem with digital games in particular is that they're highly stimulating, highly available, and again, designed to keep your eyes in the game. So you've got the eye economy, again, working really strongly in games. Not for all games, for most games. So you've got to, there's a real problem around attention grabbing, right? Like games can be really rewarding and really positive. And, I think any mum who's creating a game for a birthday party has even seen that in action, right? And that's not addictive. We're not addicted to doing that every day. Kids don't want to do pass the parcel every day, mostly. But obviously, there are some well-known games out there that are very, kids feel compelled to kind of come back every day. And for some kids, that's worse. It's not just every day, it's almost every hour. And they feel quite bad if they feel missing out on something in the game.
Yeah, I've definitely seen it, and like even in my kid and his friends, and they're like, can I have the phone and just play it? I'm like, we're going in 5 minutes. Yeah, that's fine. Squeeze it in. No. And that's the thing, right? That guilt, the mom's guilt, the parent guilt, guardian guilt, whatever you want to call it, that's all fine. And the quiet up because I need to think for 5 seconds, and the pester power, gee, they're good at that. Beautiful. So should we talk about that for a second? What's some I know we've got a big thing at the end that we want to share with you as a practical takeaway, but when it comes to that moment when we're like, they've asked for it again, or they won't get off it, or whatever, got any thoughts for our parents out there going, I just want to be a better parent? How do I deal with this moment without screaming?
Look, addiction is a very powerful thing. So you're not going to win this battle all the time. You're definitely not. I would say it's much better to take that long-term road, which we're going to talk about at the end. There's a bit of a build up to that now. And in the short term, just keep talking to your kids about what the technology is doing. So you almost, as a parent, you almost need to be part coder, don't you? Because you have to talk about things like, the information the app is taking from you and putting in the database, and how they are using that to then build more stuff that will keep you in the game. Just sort of keep talking to them about what this technology is really doing. Because we look at our devices, and kids are exactly the same. They look at their devices and they see it as just a tablet, or just a phone. It's like a book, right? It's the same shape, sort of. It's nothing like that. It's a door to a big world where a lot of stuff stuff is going on, good, bad, genuinely ugly, and that's how they need to see it. So
Yeah.
they're not going to see it that way unless we talk about it to them, with them like that. And that includes, yeah, even sites with all that filtering and nanny stuff in it, like YouTube Kids. Get the conversation going really early, really get that knowledge hammered in about what this thing is really doing,
Yeah.
and how their behavior is interacting. So you feel compelled to play this game, and that is because of the way that they reward you in the game.
Yeah. Yeah. Or how the YouTuber rewards you. So, sit there and give us likes, or if we get to this many likes, we're going to do this. Subscribe. Hey guys, subscribe. So you can do that here, by the way. Hey guys, subscribe here. Come on, look. I don't think we can talk about screens and not mention two elements that I'd love to touch on, and then we'll wrap up with our practical tip. And that is probably two fears or concerns that parents have. One is the impact on the kids' ability to socialize. So urban myth, reality, there's probably a bit of everything in there on how does that impact their ability to socialize in the real world, and, or as my kids say, the IRL, in real life. And the other is, technology in the room at night. So when we're talking about bedtime, overnight, there's lots of ways we can tackle that. So let's talk socialization, let's talk nighttime, and then let's give a lovely practical tip for our listeners.
Okay, so socialization, there's no firm evidence about what's really happening in relation to socialization, but I think as adults, we can see that it does affect our socialization. Particularly through the pandemic, I think it really, and now out of lockdown, I think it's really shown people how they behave differently on social media versus IRL. So you might have discovered that you're willing to have some conversations by typing, keyboard worrying, perhaps.
Yeah.
And not so much in real life. Now, that is a really important, moment to kind of stop and think about that. Like, why is it that is the case for you, and what is driving that? And even to have that conversation with your kids, like, this is, I do different stuff online. This is how it works for me, and this is my understanding of that. So it does, we do socialize differently on the internet, but as to the effects of that in terms of, kids' abilities to socialize, we don't have that data yet. Not for the kids who are, really growing up with a device, and they're the ones that are going to really show us what that looks like.
Yeah, because it's the same even in gaming. So from a gaming, obviously there's commentary in YouTube videos, but particularly in gaming, you have real time interactions, whether your kids are allowed to or not, but they can see. Sometimes you can hear what it is that other people are saying, and the age groups might be quite vast with that as well, and what's okay, hacking and other things, that way people talk to each other, let alone just the general thing we're talking about, their ability to socialize with other people outside of gaming as well.
On that side of things, though, we can talk about this more in social media, but when kids are doing that, when they're interacting with people online, it's important to know, do you know that person?
Yeah.
And I think online gaming is where I've seen some stuff happen, which was unsuspected by parents, because it seems like they're always going to be gaming with their friends. Yeah. And that is not always the case. So having that conversation of, do you actually know this person? Have you met them IRL? Do I know their parents? So that there's a real connection there between, understanding that it's not a benign object that you're holding here or interacting with. It's a big door to an outside world. And sometimes people involved in those online IRL conversations in games are not who you think they are.
Yeah. 100%, 100%. Awesome. So let's talk about tech in the room, particularly at night. It is a question. My teenager and I are having lovely fights over this. Sure, I'm not the only one. Even younger ones. I don't have tech in my room. I don't have a TV. I don't take my phone up for lots of reasons. But let's just talk in general what we need to think about as far as tech overnight or in bedrooms in general.
The big impact of tech overnight is this problem of FOMO. So kids kind of constantly checking, should I be involved in this conversation, or is there a conversation going on that I should know about? Does my friend need me? All that sort of FOMO stuff. Yeah. And so obviously, not surprisingly at all, that impacts his sleep. Yeah. And that's not so good at all, because the brain really needs sleep. It's its way of kind of taking out the garbage and sorting out the memories and things like that. So being able to have that discussion with your kid about, how much sleep actually are you getting? How do you actually feel? And so how should we together work with limiting this device at night so that you actually can get sleep? And for some kids, they're so worried about FOMO that needs to include discussions with other parents and, maybe even other kids with their parents about the limitations of your child's, digital life. So you could very openly say, look, if you do need help from 9 till, 6 or whatever, my kid will not have their device on them because I take it from them. So please don't take it personally. Don't think they suddenly don't like you as a friend, or they don't want to give you help. It is a digital health thing that we are doing for our family. So my son ought to talk about family health issues, even digital health, with other parents and kids. But it's a kind of a trend we need to get going, actually.
I really like it. I think it's a great idea. Yeah. And I mean, obviously, people might put it down. There's lots of apps and things you can turn, reduce that as well. That doesn't help the fight when they're saying, I want to have it in, or I'm worried that my friends are, something's going to happen to them, because they, the older they get, the more friends are more important to them than anything else. And like you said, that FOMO kicks in. So I think the sooner you can get that happening, I think with other friends, with their friends' parents, I think it's a great idea, because you are preempting that concern of my friend doesn't like me anymore. And it's really important to kids and teens.
Yeah, it just works a bit better to get their agreement on it, to work them through the problem, and then hope for that last moment of clarity on their side when they go, you're right, I'm not going to use my phone from 9 till 6. Okay, that's not always going to happen, but
look, I love this little diagram was shared with me once, which is basically 2 interlocking circles, and there's parents' choice or parents' decision, child's decision, and an overlap where it's both. And there's times when you can let the child lead, and there's times when you ideally both agree with it, and there's times you just have to be a parent, not a friend.
Yes. Yes.
Parent, not a friend, right? So as much as we all want to be friends, right?
Yeah.
So, beautiful. All right. So we're going to finish up with this practical takeaway that you can use. So this was, you were calling it a screen audit, yes?
Yeah. Okay.
Right, take us through that.
Yeah, so we love in this podcast to kind of give you a sense of hope, right? We just talked about some really tough stuff, even like, things that are happening in kids' brains, which are, largely out of our control. So that's really tough. But here's the hope part. Once you know how these technologies are kind of interacting with your brain as a kid and as an adult, that gives you more capacity to make decisions. So here's the best way to start. Pull all your devices out and bring them into the lounge room. You might be surprised how many you've got.
All the screens. Yeah,
most people are very surprised at the amount of screens they've got. So pull them all out. phones, computers. If you've got a TV in the bedroom, okay, maybe you can't pick it up, but take a photo.
Take a photo of it.
Put them on the coffee table if it's going to fit, or on the floor to actually show that map. These are
the
all
iPods, the tablets, the Nintendo Switch, all the bits.
Yeah, pull them out. And then what you see, right? So with TVs, not a fully open door, obviously, as we talked about, but the other devices are basically fully open doors to the world, the big wide world, with all the beauty and also the ugly and the incredibly ugly out there. So think about that as a family, right? Look at those screens and go, are we doing what we want to be doing with our lives? And do these screens fit into that picture? How do they fit into that picture? And these days we have to work on screens pretty much, right? Like hardly anybody's fully back in the office yet. And even there you're working on screens. So yeah, it's a thing we've got to deal with. So have a conversation as a family about what this looks like for your family. What does this pattern look like? So that it's healthy, so it still means you're connecting together. You're still having family dinners, actually talking to each other and looking at each other, you know.
No devices at the table.
Right? You're getting your sleep, right? And you're getting your learning, and just work that out as a family, because everybody has different values and that's not really a problem. It's just getting them out on the table and actually thinking it through as a family and choosing to act in a way which actually supports each other rather than drives each other apart.
Yeah, and I think there's some great things about that. There is the physicality and the visibility element of having the screens and seeing it. So that visual imprint is really quite important. But also talking about it in context of what are we using these devices for? And, you know, you got teenagers who are like, it's their lifeblood, you know, and kids, it's, you know, there's a whole pile of things in there, but having that conversation, but I think even that bigger conversation of, okay, what do we want to do in our day-to-day life, in our life overall? What's important, and how do these enhance or hinder that?
Yeah, and because it's so sneaky, right? Like they're constantly, you know, constantly trying to kind of get that eye economy more and more. You want to factor into your life a pretty regular screen audit.
Yeah.
So every year is probably a good place to kind of keep your audit. Do it every year, and that way you're staying
Christmas holidays.
Yeah, why not? Right? Or it might be a good, like, you know, spring clean for the new year or something, right?
Nice.
But whack it in, keep your family on track with your values. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. And their changing needs as well. So as those children grow, they're going to have different needs and particularly wanting to be heard. So yeah. I think that's a really great way of doing it. Beautiful. All right. Wow. We've touched on quite a lot with screen. This has been great. Looked at a few different angles. So I'd love to, if you have any questions, put them in the comments. Let us know. You can reach out to us on the various platforms. And of course, if you want to get in contact us, that's how you can do that. If you've liked this, then let us know. If you have any questions, let us know as well. Now, if you also want some help with your children, particularly school-age children, with their big emotions, with dealing and tackling with the world and dealing with anxiety, we do have Gheorg the robot, Gheorg the kid-friendly app robot. The details will be in the comments and the show notes, so check those out. And you can...
On that, just a quick note on Gheorg and screen time, we try and keep we have a limit actually in Gheorg. We try and keep kids on Gheorg for just a small amount of time, get what they need, and then get back into IRL.
Yes, they do. Very true. Because it's actually, Gheorg is, we don't really talk too much about what it is. We'll have the description, but Gheorg is a process that they check in and check their health and how they're emotionally feeling and gives them tips on how to deal with that. So it's not something going to be on for hours. It's not going to take up too much screen time. All right, we're going to jump off. Do stay tuned, though. We've got an episode coming up all on social media. So you can see we've been at the bit to jump in it already. We're going to deep dive very shortly. All right, thank you for listening, everyone, and we will see you soon. Bye.
Bye.